Hey everyone, welcome back to the TraderLion channel. This is Richard and Ross, and today we're continuing on with our Chart of the Week series, where we'll be highlighting one of these setups from Ross Haber's Top 10 report, which he publishes twice a week. And if you're interested in that, there'll be a link down below in the description and popping up right now. And today we'll be highlighting Tesla, a little-known company that I'm sure you guys haven't heard of yet, and discussing the potential setup going into next week and kind of what we're watching, both in terms of the completion of the setup as well as how to manage risk. So with that, Ross, I'll hand it over to you and talk through what you're seeing on the chart and what you're looking for next week.
Well, as it stands, we've got the market coming out of a correction, right? We had a little trouble out of the gate. S&P and NASDAQ followed through. NASDAQ undercut, but we've still got, the S&P followed through, stayed intact. And since then, we've got the market right back on track again. S&P 500 started making new highs last Thursday. The NASDAQ's not far behind. Even the Russell looks like it's shaping up down near its major moving averages there. So if it can continue to tighten up, I wouldn't be surprised to see that one back above. So anyway, so the market, it's getting there. As leadership continues to shape up, I would have to say that electric vehicles and semiconductors are definitely two of the stronger areas. They were leaders before Tesla being the leader of electric vehicles. And I mean, keep in mind now, I mean, we've even seen like XPEV reclaiming its averages last week. Ford, GM, Ford has its electric F-150. I believe GM's coming out with their pickup truck. Tesla's the leader in this group by far. So now we've built, I remember I wasn't that long ago, you and I were probably talking with Charles, and after that, as Tesla was hanging around its 200-day, and since then, it's we can see the volume came in here in a big way. We've blasted off and broke out again. This is a stage 2 base, kind of. We can't see it here. It's sitting on top of another small consolidation, and really, while this would be technically a stage 3 base, it is a base on base. So I'm not looking at this as a late stage base at all. So other than that, here's what, we've got, it's not a classic textbook double bottom base. It's double bottom-ish with the handle, right? So you can have a double bottom with handle. I always, I don't think you have to be able to, it's not so much that it meets the textbook definition as when you look at that price volume action, you're seeing a majority of accumulation throughout that pattern. And if you're seeing, and we are, you can see here, after the volume comes in, we're starting to move up on above average volume. And even as we come in here, notice most of this downside volume is below average. I think just about every day except for one. And I'm looking right here. I don't have the crosshairs. My guess is that big volume goes to this day which is actually subtle accumulation, just based on price volume. That's an accumulation day. So now we've reclaimed its 50-day on huge volume. We've pulled back, drifted, I would call that, right? Super tight closes all the way into its 50-day. We've got its moving averages curling up underneath. They're not super tight yet, but this is happening in a lot of stocks. This is what I look for, right? So as all the stocks are starting to move at the same time, we're starting to see those moving averages curl up underneath where the price and volume action is starting to tighten up and become constructive. So this situation is not just with Tesla. There's quite a few of them that look similar, to say the least. So, that being said, the fundamentals are there, the technicals are there. Now it's just a matter of, what everything does next week. There's a few stocks, I'm not going to get into them, that are also sitting on this 50-day on light volume. So now it's just a matter, are we going to break back below? Can we, we could do a little constructive shakeout and then go, who knows? Nobody does. So it's at this point, as everything's still coming together, that you really want to be selective with where you're getting into these things. So, that's really it. I love, my personality is to be able to buy on strength. And I still think this is phenomenal risk reward here. If you're buying on strength, you've got the 50-day right below. And, but there's always other areas you can choose to cut the stock at a logical, tighter place if you're looking for a swing trade or whatever it may be. So, that's really it. And then the rest speaks for itself. That the pivot's right there, 11.19.
Absolutely. And just a few things I want to add here. We did have that retest of the prior base pivot here, filled that gap right here as well. Then we saw a huge blast off on higher volume, as Ross was talking about. Nice accumulation signs in there. And now we're kind of forming a textbook flag on declining volume, well below average, and just kind of remains to be seen where this goes from next week. And Ross, some people in the comments and watching this might be thinking, this setup looks too obvious. There's going to be a shakeout. It's just kind of a false setup. It's going to fail. So I really like to respond to that when I asked you the question before we start recording. So kind of what's your take on this, and why do you think this will work?
Even if we do have that little shakeout, I don't know that that means that it won't work. Who knows if it works directly from here. And so that's why if you wanted to play it off the 50-day, the last day of the year going into the first day of the year, who knows, gap up, gap down, whatever, so it's not something I would play the 50-day on, and you could do it if you wanted. You could have bought it at the 50-day with stops at the 23, and that's still tight and logical. But in this particular case, so we've got the whole group working. I'm a big fan of seeing that whole group work together. As we know, almost 50% of a stock's move is directly related to its sector and industry group, right? So with Ford and GM looking as great as they do, even like an XPEV reclaim, and I'm going to assume Tesla will ultimately lead the way. Let's see how that first day of the year all shapes up with everybody repositioning and all that sort of thing. And I would just say, you're better off waiting for it to prove that it's going to work in this sort of environment where we're still waiting for, but you got to keep your eyes on all the stocks. If all of those, the 3 or 4 other big ones in the group and some others are starting to join and work, and Tesla's whole, I'm always looking at the other stocks in the group to help me decide what I'm going to do, right? With that stock, I want to see that it's got that overall support from the group. Tesla in and of itself, when we get to the fundamentals, I remember off the top of my head, their sponsorship situation is phenomenal. I mean, not only has it been growing, it's filled with quality funds. And so, these are the guys that are going to, they're the ones that printed this volume, and they're the ones that will eventually step in here at some point and start accumulating the stock again, assuming, things continue higher from here.
Yeah, well said. Let's move on over to the fundamentals and run through those pretty quickly. We've talked about Tesla extensively before. Fantastic earnings, sales margins the past 4 quarters. This is a super strong growth stock. And what I really like to see is not only was there tremendous EPS growth in 2021, up 169%, but in 2022, we're supposed to have follow through of 46%. I think that's kind of the more relevant number almost right now. And that's substantial, especially for a stock of this size. Here you can see the basis highlighted in MarketSmith. As always, tremendous growth in fund ownership. Still under 3,000 funds, which is almost under owned compared to an Nvidia, kind of a similar growth liquid leader. And as Ross mentioned, the super high quality fund ownership as well, which is almost more important. So yeah, from a fundamental point of view, auto manufacturers ranked 10 out of 197. There's a leading stock within a leading group. And as we mentioned previously, we just have to see how this flag plays out, and whether we do get a shakeout before it actually works. Just be ready for basically any potential scenario, manage your risk accordingly, and be ready for a push through that pivot on volume. So with that said, Ross, any last words to add on this stock?
Oh, that really covers it.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please go ahead and leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new to the TraderLion channel, and we'll see you guys in future videos. Thanks.